Kitchen Daughter, reviewing this book with my own experiences as well. So she talks about, as I've already mentioned elsewhere, the process of cooking is very calming for her. She says how she lets herself relax into the pattern of the recipe. Yeah, I find cooking very calming as well, the kind of rhythm of following the instructions. It's all laid out for you, you know, it's all very ordered, very linear, you just follow the instructions. Yeah, voila. So I can relate to that. When in tricky situations, she thinks of food as her main coping strategy. She's always, like me, she's always been an avid reader. She likes words and books and food like me. So she seems to share a lot of the same interests there. But it says how on page 65, obviously, reading couldn't help her make friends. Though she would talk to kids, but the friendship never lasted because she found it hard to act interested in what they say and not to talk too much. Her mum gave her advice, you know, don't talk too much, try and act interested in what they say. And this is all obviously very relatable because when I was a kid, you know, I found it very hard to interact with other children. I kind of veered from being a kind of complete loner, kind of like just kind of in my own little bubble, to trying to interact but never getting it right. Because yes, it would have to be on my terms, and I did struggle with the whole taking an interest thing. My mum would sort of give me very similar advice, you know, don't talk too much, take an interest in the other person, slow down, because I also used to speak too quickly as well a lot of the time, sometimes too quickly and too loudly. So yeah, and I think this feeds into masking, and obviously as I've got older, I've learned some of these skills, but they don't come naturally to me. I do try and take an effort now to try and take an interest in the other person because I've been told that that's important. And also, as I've got older, I think I have developed more of an interest in other people, maybe, in terms of like what interests them than I did as a child, because I think developmentally as you grow older, maybe you do eventually acquire some of that, but it's something I've had to learn at a lot later date than most people. And it's something I've had to actively cultivate. Now I do try and ask people lots of questions, and actually in fact I do quite like gaining information about other people now. Also asking questions can kind of put you in control. So often I do like asking other people questions about their lives, but I do like to know all the details. So that's a problem. I do like to kind of almost like, maybe like I'm a bit like an interrogator. So I've gone a bit like the other way now, but it's got a whole reciprocal thing. Yeah, I can ask people questions, but it's the whole reciprocal thing. Because, you know, you can't just ask questions, obviously, but I don't really know sometimes how to kind of draw out the conversation unless I'm in a really formal structured environment, like with my support worker, and obviously it's a lot easier because I can just talk about what I want to talk about, and that's where relationships often fall down for me, that whole reciprocal thing. So I can relate to that because my mum gave me similar advice when I was growing up. Another thing about Ginny is that she keeps a normal book. And a normal book contains cuttings from newspapers, etc., with the word normal in each cutting. So she would stick them in columns, a bit like an advice column, and this reminds her that what is normal is extremely varied. That's one of the main themes of the book, you know, that Ginny is trying to find her own normal, and she's trying to kind of like come to terms with her own differentness, state of difference, through kind of like questioning what is normal. And this normal book helps her by seeing that actually normal, what is normal? You know, it's incredibly varied. Maybe there's no such thing, technically speaking, as normal, because we all have our own kind of foibles and everything. So I quite like the idea of a normal book. I thought that's quite a good way of potentially coping with this issue and reminding yourself that there's no such thing as normal in an absolute sense, even though we still use the word, you know. She says how, you know, on page 92 that the internet is magic to her because it provides all the advantages of dealing with people without the drawbacks. Yep, absolutely. I love the internet, particularly Twitter. I'm always on Twitter, probably too much. Yeah, Twitter even more than Facebook, actually, because I find Twitter really calming. Like, it's quite funny, actually. The other day, I was feeling really, really like tense and anxious because for some reason my anxiety levels are like really, really high at the moment. I mean, they're always high. It's like my permanent state really, but even higher than normal. Probably this whole like corona thing isn't helping. And like constantly like, on the verge of panic, it kind of feels like. And the other day it happened, and I went on Twitter, I turned Twitter on, and all at once my anxiety just went. I think like a distraction of like typing and stuff, it kind of like, it almost acts like a pacifier, which is quite weird. But I often find like when I'm really anxious, if I put on the internet and I specifically go on Twitter, it doesn't always help, but 9 times out of 10, it will have some positive influence and will make me calmer. So yeah, I don't know what that's about. Let me know if you can relate. Yeah, she says how when without the person in person, it gives her more time to kind of interact, and she likes asking questions, with plenty of time to think, and she can put together intelligent points, and I can relate to that as well. And on the hang on, sorry, turn the page. Where were we? Yes. Yeah, and also interestingly, on page 103, her sister says that she has only 2 speeds, that Ginny has only 2 speeds, scared and angry. Yeah, like me. I'm pretty much nearly always in a state of fear, or I should say probably more like a state of anxiety, I guess. I do get angry sometimes, and I think that probably comes out of fear, because when you're in a state of fear or anxiety, you're very close to anger a lot of the time as well, because you're in that state of kind of like piss off mode a lot of the time, because the world just feels so annoying. So yeah, I can relate to that. Lots of things set Ginny off, which is why she doesn't go out much. She's pretty much like a hermit, like I am. I mean, I was pretty much a hermit even before Corona, it's just got even worse now. Things like sudden noises, strangers' touch, all obviously completely relatable. It also says how Ginny has always wanted a husband and kids, I guess like a kind of very conventional lifestyle, but she hasn't really visualised the steps between here and there. It's very difficult for her, so although she wants this in a sort of like fantasy world, like an idealised fantasy, it's very difficult for her to kind of bridge the gap between the fantasy and the reality, which again I can relate to. I mean, I'm gay, so I obviously don't want a husband, but it's funny though, because when I remember when I was like I think about sort of 10 years old, I had this kind of like fantasy that when I was 20, I would get married and have kids, just like that. And of course that hasn't happened, and I don't think it ever. Well, I don't want kids anyway. That's a whole other issue. Personally, who would want to have kids in such an evil world? But that's another issue. The world is going to pot. Who would want to have kids and prolong suffering? I'm an anti-natalist, but at the same time, like I would kind of like to have like a relationship in theory, but in practice it's so difficult, and I don't know how to do it. So I can relate to Ginny there. And as I said, her older sister Amanda wants Ginny to come and live with her, but Ginny feels that her own wish is not being considered. I think that's quite a common autistic thing, like where you feel like your own wishes aren't being considered, and maybe like you're being rather gaslighted by other non-autistics, like making you feel like your own views don't count. So I can relate to that. Oops. And as I say, her sister thinks Ginny won't cope on her own, as Ginny has no friends or support to fall back on, other than her sister, because she's very isolated. So her sister worries about how Ginny will cope with things like shoveling snow, changing light bulbs. And again, like I said earlier, my parents had very, very similar concerns about me, and I think it must be quite a common concern when you are a bit behind your years in certain independent skills. But maybe, as I say, she underestimates Ginny a bit too much. I mean, after all, Ginny is very capable in the kitchen, just like I am. As Amanda can't cook and asks Ginny to show her. So, it's all relative. I mean, Ginny does have skills. She's a great cook. It also becomes apparent that Ginny has not yet been diagnosed autistic, so at this point it's just a hypothetical, but her sister tells her that she should see a doctor to get a diagnosis for her problem. Okay, now I'm going to leave it there because I don't want the video to run out of me, and Yeah, and I think this is taking a little bit longer than I'd anticipated, only because when I go through the points, I can't help but interject with some of my own experiences, just to kind of, because I do like doing a little bit of that, but I like using a book as a kind of, I don't know, a sort of way of talking about some of my own experiences as well and how they compare. So I'll have to come back to this next week at the juncture where Ginny's sister tries to get Ginny to get diagnosed or to get assessed. And there's a few more points that I'd like to talk about next week, particularly with relation to the psychiatrist that Ginny sees, and that's where I have one of my particular grievances in this book that really did irritate me. But I'll leave you guessing what that is, what the psychiatrist had to say in next week. So thank you for watching.